This is Gene Krebs.
Hi there. Oh. Whoop. Whoosh.
And we're high on Ohio.
We're going around this great state. We're interviewing people all around here who know how things work and know how the civic capacity is so important to Ohio and what things we can do to improve that civic capacity. It's my great pleasure to be here today with Bill Denihan, who is the CEO of the Alcohol, Drug Addiction, and Mental Health Services for Cuyahoga County, who has had a long and, shall we say, a circuitous career getting here. Bill, first of all, when I look at your CV, my first question comes to mind is, so what haven't you done in state and local government? But go ahead and talk to us a little bit about, now, I know you were born in a log cabin you built with your own hands, but since you're a Democrat, you did it with a union card, too.
Yes, I did.
So please, go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself and how'd you fetch up here?
Well, I'm a native Clevelander.
Okay.
And I truly love Cleveland. I'm a die-in-the-heart-wool Clevelander. And
my wife's from Lyndhurst.
Well, she's still a Clevelander. When
She's
people
still a
go
Clevelander. It makes my children half Clevelander?
When they travel, they don't say they're from Lyndhurst, they say they're from Cleveland.
Exactly.
So it encompasses our entire area, and I'm very proud of that. So how did I get into government? Well, I was a businessman. I had my own business.
Really?
And it was a temporary help business called Skill Staff.
Okay.
And I've been involved in politics, Democratic politics, for some time, and I was then. In fact, I ran one of the deputy registrar offices, the license plates distribution, at 110th and Lorraine on the west side of Cleveland. It was the biggest one in the county, and it was because I knew individuals in the Democratic Party. And that's the way the appointment was. So I had some experience with government, but that's not how it got me in. A friend of mine by the name of Tony Stringer was appointed as administrator for workers' compensation for the state of Ohio. And he called me up and he says, Bill, how would you like to run Northeast Ohio out of Cleveland? And you could finish your education, because I purposely built my business on 20th and Euclid so I could go to school at CSU.
Okay.
Incidentally, that did not happen.
Okay. I
got too busy in my life and my career that I didn't finish it there. And run workers' compensation. So I decided to sell my business, and I took this position as a deputy administrator for workers' compensation. And that was under the John Gilligan administration, and it was 6 months before the end of his first term, which he lost.
Yes. 11,000 and some votes. One vote per precinct, if I remember correctly.
That's right, and we all went to bed thinking he won. So my job was very precarious in that it was one of those that you serve at the pleasure of.
Yeah.
And so the new administration came on, and the new administrator was a guy by the name of Ken Krause. He was a former professor at Ohio State University, and he came up to Cleveland and says, well, we're going to keep you on for a while. I said, okay. And I thought I would be removed, and actually I really do support that system, that whoever runs for office should have people in positions that are congruent with their vision to carry it out.
But you were the exception.
Well, I turned out to be one of the exceptions.
Well, so was it a good thing that you were kept on, or was it a bad thing that you were kept on? Would it have been better if you'd been unemployed, or what now?
No, I don't think it would have been better if I was unemployed. It was a good thing for myself and my family, and I hope for the state. As it turns out, during the process, a number of things happened in that first year. I was working on the Ohio Senate as an advisor while we were rewriting workers' compensation law for the reform of it. And the second thing is I uncovered the massive fraud that happened here in Cleveland, in which 289 individuals, mostly attorneys, were convicted of frauding the state of Ohio workers' comp by well over $10 million. And we got the license of 5 attorneys and 5 doctors.
Okay.
And one attorney committed suicide, and we believe one individual was murdered.
Oh.
And it was on the headlines for most of 1975.
Okay.
And
So Jimmy DeMora was not an aberration.
he wasn't. And so Jim Rhodes, who was the new governor, thought this was a statewide
Problem.
fraud, and I told him respectfully it wasn't, but he wanted me to come to Columbus to train the Highway Patrol on how to detect this. And this is long before computers. And so the Highway Patrol actually came up here, and I trained them, and they went all over the state, and they didn't find it anywhere in the state. It was really just in Northeast Ohio.
Well, then let me ask you this question that I've not asked anybody before. All right. Columbus and Cincinnati run relatively clean administrations, okay? Very few problems with Hamilton County or Franklin County. Cuyahoga County and Cleveland seems to have these problems quite a lot. Why?
Well,
I mean, it is not a state. It's actually 5 different fiefdoms united by one single tax code and a state football team.
I don't know if it's particular for Cuyahoga County, but I do know it's,
Youngstown too.
It's not because of the system, it's because of people. It's a leadership or lack of, or self-interests that go beyond the scope of the position.
Okay.
And it's unfortunate that it happens, but Cuyahoga County is focused on, I think, more so in that it has the largest of everything.
It does. Last night I had joined a friend for dinner out in Lakewood, and I was coming back on Clifton, and I saw the lights about 9 o'clock. It just took my breath away. I went, this is a big city. You know, I mean, it has a real downtown, not 5 or 7 or 8 skyscrapers. It's got, I could not even if I started to count them, I would have run off the road and killed myself.
Yeah. Well, the way to detect progress in a city is how many cranes you see hanging around the city.
And we should clarify, you do not mean the water bird, the crane. You mean the construction crane.
Construction cranes, and you'll see many cranes around the city.
Yes.
And that denotes progress and great development of a thriving city. And you'll see that in Cleveland right now. That's part of the scene you saw when we were going up Clifton.
Yeah, you know, the thing is, I've tried to explain to folks elsewhere in Ohio, you know, they go, oh, man, poor. I go, no, actually, you need to go to Cleveland, go down to the warehouse district. There's actually, in some ways, a housing shortage going on right now in downtown.
Exactly, and
people are voting with their feet.
That's right.
And their feet are taking them to the downtowns.
Yeah. So the size of workers' comp, just for the Cleveland Northeast Ohio office, is larger than states of Minnesota, North Dakota, South Dakota, Tennessee, several other states. The larger the capacity that was in this office was larger than some states altogether.
Yeah.
So it wasn't a small operation. It was a huge operation. And so I uncovered it through an unusual set of circumstances, and next thing I know, they promoted me, and I was in Columbus as a state claims director for workers' compensation.
Okay.
And I didn't change my party affiliation.
Okay.
I was still a Democrat, I'm proud to say.
Okay.
And so the interesting thing about that particular time, there was a movement underfoot by the insurance industry to take over workers' compensation in Ohio because it's a monopoly system. And it's really one of the best in the country. And so after a year and a half, I resigned and worked for the Ohio House of Representatives on the House Labor Committee, run by a guy by the name of Leonard Cameron at the time.
Okay.
And as a consultant on workers' compensation to ensure they kept the new reform legislation going.
Okay.
And I also sold plastic flower pots.
Okay.
So when I told the administration I was resigning to sell plastic flower pots, they thought that I really was not serious. And I did. A friend of mine, as a neighbor, developed a special plastic injection molding machine. Instead of knocking out one plastic flower pot, he could knock out 4 at a time.
Okay.
And he revolutionized the plastic flower pot industry.
Okay.
And I helped open up Ohio,
Okay.
if you will. So I had fun doing that. But I also served as a consultant on workers' compensation. And from there, I be able to come back to Cleveland, and I worked as a law firm administrator for a firm called Shapiro and Kendis, with the largest law firm dealing with workers' compensation in Ohio. And they were into their second generation, now third generation, of attorneys through Shapiro, Kendis, and Petro. And I was their administrator, and eventually I helped reorganize their office. From there, I was offered the position as the personnel director for Cuyahoga County. And just about the same thing happened to me after 6 months. After I was hired, there was 2 Democrats. They were Bobby Sweeney and Ed Feehan were the Democrats, and the Republican, whose name escapes me for the moment, Virgil Brown.
Okay.
So 6 months later, Bob Sweeney lost to Campanella.
Okay.
Then there were 2 Republicans and 1 Democrat, and I was in what is considered the most pivotal patronage position as the personnel director. But they wanted to keep me on, at least.
Once again, you're belying your earlier statement as to what makes good public policy here.
Well, you're right, and there's more to that story as you'll find out as we go along. So, so they kept me on for about 4 months, and finally they said, "Look, we have to remove you." I said, "Fine." So I went on, and the next thing I know is the fellow that was running the county recorder's office passed away, and he was in his 4th year of a 4-year term. And Tim Hagan was the county chair, and he says, "Well, I'm going to appoint myself," meaning himself, "and then appoint you to run it."
Okay.
So I did that, and for a year, and because he didn't want other people that were running for it to be appointed at the time. Eventually, Benny Bonanno won that race.
Okay.
So Tim and I were very, very close, and then Dick Celeste was running for governor, and at that particular time, Tim was supporting a guy by the name of Billy Joe Brown.
Okay.
And I was supporting Dick, and Dick eventually won, and asked me to come down to be the personnel director for the state of Ohio. So I had about 57,000 employees, of which about 3,500 served at the pleasure of.
Okay.
And when you look over the last 16 to 20 years of government, 16 of them were run by Jim Rhodes.
Yes.
4 by John Gilligan.
Yes.
And Dick Celeste was the change agent at that particular time. He was going to make changes. And so we thought that if he's going to do that, he needs people working for him in these sensitive, unclassified positions that believe in his vision and are congruent with the mission. So my task was to send all 3,500 a letter saying they're removed from serving, and should they want a job, they should apply by the new director for the same job they've had. And it turned out the Celeste administration hired back about 2,500 of those individuals. And more importantly, we won all these cases in the Supreme Court. We didn't lose any because they weren't removed for any other reason than we stated.
Right.
So that's what I meant earlier when I said the person should be congruent with the.
Okay.
So, the next thing I know is they passed collective bargaining, and it was passed in the summer of 1983, and they had to April 1st of 1984 to set it up, brand new agency. And the governor called me up February 22nd and said, I want you to go over and set up CERB. I said, well, there is no place to go. It's not set up. He says, precisely. So I had to set up a brand new agency in about 38 days to get it started, to get a location, to get furniture, to hire people, to train people, to set up rules through JCAR and the legislature, and have a fully functional agency to accept representations by unions for the State Employment Relations Board. And I did that, and it actually, some views saved collective bargaining in Ohio, because if it didn't start on time, given the tenuous nature that only passed the General Assembly by one vote, it could have gone down the tubes.
A lesson here for Washington and the rollout of Obamacare is what this conversation is now reminding me of.
Yeah. If you're going to have something that's that controversial
and that big,
you better get it done on time.
And done right.
And done right. And this is one of those cases where that was on the line, because they had 6 months to set it up, and the CERB board members weren't getting along, and they weren't getting along with the governor, and finally Dick Celeste removed one of the members and then told him that to hire me as the acting executive director. So I did that. And then at the time that was going on, Merle Shoemaker, who was the lieutenant governor, was running the Department of Natural Resources. He was very, very ill. And the governor asked me to go over there to run Natural Resources while Merle was ill, hoping that he would overcome, but as we know, that never happened. He passed away. And I was one of the, if you were, the fun jobs. There were 16 divisions, at least at that time. And there was the regulatory division, oil, gas, water. Then there were the fun division, like parks and recreation, wildlife. And there were divisions people didn't know about. And they all were working, not together, but against each other. Yeah.
I can see, a very good friend of mine, Sean Logan, was director of ODNR under Ted Celeste. And he loved it because of the simple fact that every day you get to go to a different, a geological facility, you're going to, a canal, you're going to a lock and dam, or a wildlife,
or a golf course.
Or a golf course. Or every single day, it's something completely and totally different.
Yes, it is. And
he loved that job.
I loved that job too. And I knew I was there temporary, but I was there during the time period we built the Inner Harbor through Pat Sweeney, who was the state representative of this area. And Mary Rose O'Carty getting federal money, we actually built the Inner Harbor for Cleveland and turned it over to the city of Cleveland. I also built Euclid Beach as a state park. Given that I grew up in Euclid and went to Euclid Beach as a kid and worked there for a short period of time. So that was special in doing that during my tenure. I had a good time there. And one of the things that happened is that my question is, are we really in charge?
Yeah.
And given that of the 16 departments in the natural resources, they all had to be appointed by the advice and consent of the Ohio Senate. So while the governor appoints the director, a special interest had great influence on who would be the director of coal, reclamation, oil and gas, wildlife, and etc.
Yeah.
And so it was like dealing with 16 independent entrepreneurs. I one day, I wanted to bring some seriousness to the job, and that I wanted some continuity on everything we did, and bring them all together. I said, I brought all 16 chiefs in and said, I'm going to make a policy decision that will impact the department. Everybody will be impacted by this decision. And I want it carried out immediately. And it goes to the soul and the heart of natural resources. And they're all paying attention and listening. I said, okay, effective immediately, we will disband and ban forever all plastic plants. And we would just use regular plants that we grow in our greenhouses. The next day, I couldn't get through the hallways in our main headquarters because they're full of plastic plants. And that our lodges had all these plastic plants, and I didn't realize how effective that was, in that I was sort of kidding, saying, you know, let's get rid of the plastic plants and go with the organic plants that we grow and we promote. And so that's why at least the lodges and the office that we had got rid of the plastic plants. If anybody's interested in what happened in 1985, that was one of the big things that happened.
You know, you're also taking me back to a conversation I had with one of your predecessors there, Bob Teeter. And Bob and I were at an event, and we were standing there, and I turned to Bob and I said, back when you ran ODNR, were you able to ever rein in Division of Wildlife? And Bob just said, I never could control those cowboys. Yeah.
Nobody can, because they have special funding.
Yeah, although I think that's been weakened recently.
And
but it is still, and I've been on record saying that is an agency that I think has tremendous potential to embarrass a governor. And this one has, I mean, there's been some unfortunate graft and corruption things out of that office recently here. I don't know if you followed up with that, but in any case, so after ODNR,
Director Shoemaker, Lieutenant Governor Shoemaker passed on. Joe Summer, who was the governor's chief of staff, wanted ODNR, so he wanted to go there.
Okay.
At the same time, the governor wanted me to put me over highway safety, which is the Highway Patrol and the Bureau of Motor Vehicles.
Okay.
So that's where I went next. And in government, there are agencies that are viewed as very, very top-notch, superior agencies. That would be the Highway Patrol.
Okay.
Ohio Highway Patrol, for example, state of Florida and several other states in America model their Highway Patrol after the Ohio Highway Patrol. And it's thought of as one of the most professional, well-run organizations in government in America. It's paramilitary. Then we have the Bureau of Motor Vehicles.
Okay.
And it could be viewed as just the opposite.
Okay.
And it was really, we still had at that time the political appointments of all the deputy registrars in the state of Ohio. The last large bastion of partisan politics, if you will, in which that distributed all of our license plates and our driver's licenses. And the person that ran those agencies were selected by the political party chair and power in the governor's office.
Yeah.
So if a Democrat was in the governor's office, the county Democratic chairperson would appoint his or her friends to run these offices,
Yeah.
which is a government function. And at that time, this is 1986, 87 that I'm talking about, there were 289 deputy registrars in Ohio. They made conservatively between $25 and $28 million a year. And
Wow.
the money they had, the purpose of the dollars, whether you're Republican or Democrat, was to employ people, and they had about 22 to 2,300 people that they had. But they also raised money to fund local candidates to run for statewide office. And part of the money, half the money went to the county chairs, and another half the money went to the state county chairperson. And at that time, they were charging either a nickel, dime, or a quarter more per transaction. And given that there were 13 million vehicles in the state of Ohio at that time, that's 13 million times each transaction.
Wow.
And that there were 10 million drivers, and you had to turn over every 4 years, at least 2.5 million drivers had to have their license renewed, and another 600,000 or 700,000 getting new licenses.
This was an opportunity for mischief.
And that's exactly well. So if it was a slow day in the news media, you'd see long lines at the bureau offices, and nobody liked the system.
Right.
And it's horribly run.
Right.
So that was the other department.
Okay.
So I had the very, very good and the very, very questionable. After Governor Celeste's re-election, he called me and says, I want you to do three things. I want you to remove the politics of the appointment of the deputy registers. I want you to improve the system vastly, and I don't want you to increase the fees.
Okay.
And so we did, but it was at the consternation of all the Democrats in the House. I mean, Vern Rife, who was a speaker, had his daughter had an agency. My mother-in-law here in Cuyahoga County had an agency under John Coyne, who was a county chair. So it was very familiar with the people in party politics. And so we actually accomplished that, removed the politics and set up mail-in registration, which reduced all the offices by 1/3 because we didn't need that volume. And we removed the long lines. And the simplest thing in the long lines, previously you would get your license plate by the alphabetical listing of your last name. If you were Anderson, it was January.
Yeah.
If you were Zygmunt, it was December. And what did you do? You waited to the last 2 or 3 days of the month.
Of course you would.
Right. So we simply changed it to the owner's birthday.
Okay.
And so that spread the birthdays around $365 a year.
Yeah.
So just doing that did that. And the Democrats didn't want that to happen. And the Republicans wanted it to happen. And they were in favor because if it happened, that would be good. If it didn't, if we fell on our face, then it would be an embarrassment to the Democrats. But it passed, and it worked, and it was a lot of hard work. During that time, in the middle of that, Chernobyl exploded in '86, and the governor appointed me the head of the Nuclear Power Evacuation Commission to determine whether nuclear power plants would continue in Ohio, and that was supposed to be a 90-day stint, but it lasted about 1.5 years.
Okay.
And we made recommendations.
You really can't hold a job, can you?
I can't. So we made recommendations to keep the plants open, but keep them safe, and have immediate immediate notification is should there be a meltdown.
Okay.
And so did that. In 1989, Mike White got elected mayor of Cleveland, and the governor's term was over in 1990, and the mayor called the governor and asked him if I was going to come back home to Cleveland. And I had some intention to do it, but not every intention. But given that my father-in-law worked for Mike White as the chief of police, as Ed Kovacic, and my wife Mary wanted to come back home, so I came back. I left the White administration a year earlier and came back, and Mike White appointed me as the service director for the city of Cleveland. And that was a lot of fun, plowing the snow and filling up potholes. And
Made for some interesting Thanksgiving dinners, I bet, though, then.
yes, it did.
Yeah.
Yes, it did. I would say grace, and also put subliminal message in there. Please don't snow. Give me the funding to pay for the overtime.
Yeah.
But it was responsible for waste collection,
Yeah.
snow removal, streets, buildings, bridges. I had two of my bridge operators reverse the spinning of the swing bridge across from the Flatiron Cafe, and they ran over their own cars and knocked them off the bearings of the bridge in the middle of the height of the summer renaissance in the flats that was going on in the 90s. And that was such a nightmare during that time. I changed a few words in a contract to allow us to have our waste not go more than 27 miles, and that allowed us to go into Summit County and saved over $14 million in a year by changing a few words in the contract, and that allowed us to make some different shifts in our budget and so forth. And one of the things that happened, I got the mayor to agree that we'd take half that money and do some neat programs with street cleanup. So in the meantime of that, I find out that the mayor is giving half that money for police overtime. And so my father, the chief of police, I say, you know, you're taking that money and putting it in overtime. That's wrong. It should be used in the service department. 3 months after that, he appoints me the safety director.
Okay.
So he says, the mayor says...
Very interesting Thanksgiving dinners now.
Well, and you know the reason why it's very interesting, because I told the mayor he can't appoint me to do that. And he says, yes, I can. I was just reelected. I said, no, you can't. He says, no, I can. He says, you can't. He says, well, I'm going to remove Ed. Ed's my father-in-law. Ed Kovacic is my father-in-law, and so this was like...
Very interesting Thanksgiving dinners.
And he's outstanding chief of police, and everybody loves him. And because in Cleveland, the chief of police reports to the safety director. So for 1 month, my father-in-law reported to me. So we'd be in meetings, and he'd say, Director Son? I'd say, yes, Chief Dad.
Oh, that's a riot.
And we survived that Christmas. He was such a professional and totally supportive of me, and gave me counsel when I needed it, because he ended up serving as a chief of police a couple times. Ed went on to be the safety director for Gateway. Okay. And so running the Department of Public Safety, which at that time had about 62% of the entire city budget, because it has police, fire, EMS, the dog kennels, the House of Corrections, and traffic engineering. So it was a demanding job, and one that has the closest instinct to the citizens, which is safety.
Yeah.
And I thoroughly enjoyed it. And I met many people that are really committed to saving lives and protecting property. You know, it's good. I enjoyed it very much. But there came a time when I felt that I couldn't serve the mayor anymore. And by the way, the two individuals that I hold the highest for understanding government and having a vision and being able to articulate the vision and then carry out the mission of that vision is Dick Celeste and Mike White.
Okay.
Not everybody could do that.
Right.
They had the ability to have a vision, articulate it, and equally important, implement it. That's hard to do.
Yeah.
They did it, and they did a wonderful job. So Jane Campbell, who is a commissioner, county commissioner, asked me if I was interested in Children and Family Services, of which they were looking for a director for about a year. Somebody says, well, we should get somebody like Denihan. I said, well, why don't we call Denihan himself and see if he's interested?
Okay.
And I was, and they appointed me the director of the Department of Children and Family Services, and I served there for 2.5 years and made some very significant changes there. Some of the things I'm most proud of is reducing the morale to reduce their turnaround time from 35% to less than 3%.
Wow.
And in that business, it's kind of unheard of. It's a case study in Harvard University, how I worked with the union president to help make these changes.
Okay.
So we turned it around, and then I had this notion I should run for mayor, and that would be against Mike White. So I talked to the 3 county commissioners, which is Jimmy DeMora, Tim McCormick, and Jane Campbell, and they all said I was nuts, but go ahead and do it. And I did. And then...
but you really admired Mike White.
Pardon?
But you really admired Mike White.
Yes, I did. But in the last 2 years of his term, I believe he lost the ability to lead.
Okay.
And you need the support of the business community. You need the support of the community, and you need support of collective bargaining and unions, if you could get it, and the media and council. And in every case, that support dwindled.
Okay.
And so that's why I was running. A week later, he announced he wasn't going to run.
Okay.
So I said, well, gee whiz, I cleared the field in my delusionary sense. And that time, so two of my bosses, Jane Campbell and Tim McCormick, were going to run.
Okay.
And they did. And they didn't like it, and they wanted me to leave. So I eventually left Children and Family Services and learned the lesson in politics that it's one thing to run for office, and it's another thing to actually run the offices, and that you need a base to work from. And I did not have that.
Right.
And so I lost. But I had a good time.
Okay.
I had a lot of fun. I had, and one of the best stories is, well, 2 stories. One is that when we were at the interviews, they would say, well, I agree with Denihan.
Okay.
Someone said, I even hire him. Well, everybody knew in the last couple of weeks after the Plain Dealer endorsed Jane Campbell that it was over with. So when somebody runs for office and you know they're going to lose, and you go to their election headquarters, nobody's there.
Yeah.
So we had our house open to everybody, and I thought, well, nobody will come. We had over 110 people, and they stayed. and we had a good time. And in the middle of the celebration, about 9:30, a ticker went across Channel 3 saying I was leading Jane Campbell by about 2,000 votes. And so we went nuts thinking I won. And then another ticker 5 minutes later said correction.
Oh.
So I experienced victory and defeat.
The agony and the ecstasy all at once.
But I tell you, that was a wonderful, wonderful experience. And I thought I knew Cleveland. But the Cleveland I learned was even greater than I thought. And its diversity and its genuineness. So that December, actually Bishop Pilla called me up and asked me to set up a commission to review Catholic priest who this is that committed sexual offenses against children in the Catholic Church. So I set up the commission. So I had something to do. And working for our church. And that was an extraordinary experience within itself. At the same time, the chair of the mental health board called me up and said, would you like to run mental health? I said, well, what do you mean? So I got interviewed. They offered me the job. And they said I'd start in January. And then I find out that the county commissioners, which was just Demora and McCormick, didn't like it, and they told the mental health board you can't hire him. So they had to come back and they rescinded their offer. They said your $14 million subsidy is questionable at this point in time. So we wanted you to hire somebody with mental health experience, not somebody who just ran for office and was without a job. So I says, okay, well, forget it, I'm not interested. And then about 3 months later, they called me back again and said, well, look, we're still interested. I said, wait a minute, you're still interested? So at that time, I thought, well, I think I would like to do that. So I made an effort and met with all the 40 different providers and asked them what's wrong with the system that they're looking for a change agent. So they interviewed me again, and it was a totally different interview that I knew a good deal about what was wrong. So then they wanted me again, and through a whole number of unusual things, I got appointed. And that was in July of 2002. And the county commissioners in 2007 said, we want the consolidations of both boards, and we want that to be effective July 1st of 2009. And we did it, and they made me the chief executive officer, and that brings me to today.
So what exactly do you folks, I know what you do here. By the way, two things. Before we go off into that, what your story reminds me of is the fact that I've lived through the Voinovich, Taft, Strickland, and now Kasich administration. I've lived through God knows how many members of the General Assembly. Everybody seems to believe that when they sit in that chair, they're the first person to sit in that chair. Nobody's ever sat in that chair before. No one will sit in that chair afterwards. And the thing I'm taking away from your story is that there were people who sat in these chairs many times before you, and there will be people who sit in these chairs many times after you. And it's just wonderful to hear this continuity. But in any case, what do you folks, I know what you do here, but tell for the camera, what do you guys do here?
Well, we are the safety net for individuals that have mental illness and or addiction illnesses of drugs or alcohol. For that do not have Medicaid or private insurance. And it's important to know that a lot of don't have private insurance, but those that have Medicaid in Ohio only covers 7 of the 25 different areas that they could cover. So having Medicaid is important, but it doesn't cover everything one needs, whether it's mental health or addiction side, to have full recovery. So we're talking about employment, vocation, emergency services, coming out of the hospital, coming out of jail, jobs, housing, all those types of things are integral to a person in recovery and completing recovery. And so we are that safety net for those individuals.
Well, let me ask you this question. Colorado and Washington State have both recently legalized marijuana. It's restricted. It's a tax. How do you see, if Ohio were to develop legalized marijuana, how do you see that affecting your organization here and the needs involved?
It would probably be more regulatory.
Okay.
In that I'm assuming it would be regulatory.
Okay.
If it became legal, someone's got to regulate it.
Okay.
And I think that we would have some regulatory aspect to it.
Okay. Do you think it'd make your day job more difficult? And the reason I'm thinking about this is, we have, in the state of Ohio, we have gambling, which is a dysfunctional behavior. We have alcohol, which in excess is a dysfunctional behavior. And we have drugs, which are dysfunctional behaviors. And the state has developed this tendency now to start to say, all right, well, you're going to go ahead and play the numbers, so we're going to go ahead and make the Ohio lottery. And gambling is a dysfunctional behavior. But we're going to go ahead and regulate it and tax it. Does this aspect of the government, in effect, does this legitimize it? Does it make it more hard to combat?
There's a thought that it's an entree drug. Yeah. It's a drug that people start with. Yeah. I've been meeting with persons that are recovering addicted heroin addicts. And I asked them, how did they get to where they're at? And they tell me, half of them tell me, well, I started very young, 10, 11, 12, smoking marijuana. Then I went to pills, and then I went to pain, then I went to heroin. Same story for at least half of them. So it's a progression, and one could say that about cigarettes.
Yeah.
It's the gateway drug, if you will.
And I have seen some studies that indicate there's a very high correlation between cigarette smoking and other drug abuse. That cigarettes is basically, it's an antidepressant. Nicotine's an antidepressant.
Well, if you
get them off of cigarettes, the best way to do it is with antidepressant drugs.
If you knew the numbers of cigarettes are smoked by persons under 18 as compared to persons under 30, you'd be shocked.
Okay.
So it appears to be a young person's coming of age type of experience.
Okay.
And marijuana sits right in there.
Okay.
So one could argue saying, well, if we want to eliminate the eventuality of addiction, then why would we support the gateway to addiction, which is marijuana? Besides, it has some long-lasting impact on an individual. So from that viewpoint, I could see that we would have a greater number of addiction cases by promoting the legalization of it if it goes beyond the medical use of it.
Right.
So
there may be some. There's some legitimate research saying that it does have it.
There is an argument for some legitimate resource in terms of those in hospice that have a number
of cancers
that are terminal.
Yeah.
So to make their last days easier, that there is that argument that why not? So the other part, though, is a legalization for recreational use, and that's what we're talking about. And I think that it's a problem in terms of being that gateway drug, and if we're into preventing those things from happening, then we're fostering it to happen by legalizing it.
Yeah. All right. And this is important because we may be asked to make a decision on that here in Ohio. At that point in time, I would hope and expect that what I call the ADAMHS boards, the mental health drug addiction boards, to weigh in and just inform folks. Well, here's the ramifications of it. One of the things we ask people on this show is about myth busting. And could you tell us a myth that everybody here in Ohio thinks is true, but you know is false, and you can go ahead and blow that up? Or
Let me give that some thought.
all right.
But I want to comment about the marijuana. We have put on our agenda that we'll be making that decision this year.
Okay.
So it's one of our advocacy efforts that we will have public discussions on to either go for it or against it.
Okay.
So that will happen this year.
I think the citizens will have. I do not know what happened in Colorado or Washington, but I think the citizens here will recognize the importance of what your organizations have to say here statewide. What keeps you up at night regarding your day job here?
I go over my agenda for the next day.
Okay.
And play it out in my mind.
Okay.
And thinking about
permutations, what can go wrong, what are you going to miss, Can you get that here, can you actually get from this point to that point, can you find parking, what will you do for lunch, did your staff plan in time for lunch for you?
Well, it's really long range planning.
Okay.
Being half a step, what I call half a step ahead of the devil, is being half a step ahead by planning and more planning and making sure you're positioned in the right place.
Okay.
I think that's important.
Okay.
And so I think like that. And
well, talking a little bit about planning here, let's just play a little game here where, okay, what in the upcoming after the upcoming election, okay, the governor will be proposing his agenda. I don't say her because there's no her running at this point in time, but his agenda for the state of Ohio. If you could have the governor do one thing in their next term, what would you have them do?
Recognize that Medicaid doesn't cover everything, and it's what we call non-Medicaid funding has to be have parity with all the counties in Ohio.
How do you mean? What's parity with all the counties in Ohio? What's that mean?
Cuyahoga County, along with Hamilton and Franklin County, compared to per capita by citizens, have the least amount of money. We get about $6 per citizen for mental illness.
Okay.
There are some counties that get over $21 to $22.
Okay.
And
why is it set up this way?
Well, I don't know, and I don't agree with it.
Okay.
And we're asking for parity, and bring the same amount of funding per capita. Okay. By county. So if there's one thing I'd like to have them do, is remedy that. Okay. And that would be resolve a significant amount of money for our larger counties, which has a greater experience of illnesses and mental illness and addictions. Okay. So I think that
is that because the mentally ill from, let's just pick on Bucyrus, would tend to want to come north to Cleveland for? No. It's not that Cleveland's a detractor.
I don't. We don't know why, because this happened over Democratic and Republican governors over the last 20 years. Okay. So I don't look at it as purposely political. Okay. I think it's incompetency on the part of some individuals over the years, and not paying attention to it that, well, yes, the larger counties need more money because they have more people. Okay. And
how much money are we talking about here?
We're talking millions and millions of dollars.
Okay. How many millions?
Well, I think to rectify it's going to take at least another $150 to $200 million.
Okay. All right. Of state money put into those three larger counties.
Yeah. Now, the thing that I guess I want to share relative to a myth, that people look at charisma and confidence as competency.
Okay.
And I think so often they're fooled, and not to be fooled by charisma and confidence, that it equals competency, because it doesn't.
It's the Greek myth. They look beautiful. They're beautiful of body. They're beautiful of mind. They have great hair. And so you think, they know what they're talking about.
But rarely are they confident.
Yeah.
So that's why I mentioned about Dick Celeste and Mike White.
Uh-huh.
They were able to articulate a vision
Uh-huh.
and implement that vision
Okay.
with effectiveness.
Okay.
There are people that are able to articulate the vision, but have no clue on implementing it as a public figure.
Okay.
And we've seen that happen locally, and we've seen it happen statewide, and we've seen it happen nationally. So I think the myth that I'd want to break is, please don't mix up the charisma and the confidence of the individual as competency. Doesn't work.
Okay. Is there any particular person you're thinking of, or it's just in general?
Well, in general, and the people could just sit back and think about individuals.
But we'll all tend to think about the person we already don't like and put them into that category is what my fear is.
There are some people that I didn't appreciate in the beginning that I appreciate today because of their raw confidence.
Okay. All right.
And they're not all Democrats.
Right. How do you inform yourself? I mean, so have you read any, or written in your case too, because you're very accomplished? Have you read or written any great books lately?
Well, I've just finished The Life of Cleopatra.
Okay.
And it was really interesting.
I saw the reviews of that in the Wall Street Journal. Mm-hmm. Yeah, she wasn't what you think.
No, she wasn't.
She wasn't a great beauty by any standards.
No, I was surprised.
Not Elizabeth Taylor.
I was surprised about her lack of beauty, but she had more calculating, strategic, nerve, and insight to survive over two of the most powerful leaders in the world.
Yeah.
Mark Antony and
Julius Caesar.
Julius Caesar.
Yeah.
And protect her homeland.
Yeah.
And she rarely is given credit for that. The credit that she has given has been promulgated by Elizabeth Taylor.
Yeah.
And so that is the myth that goes on there. But she was extremely effective as a leader of her country.
Yeah, she was. And
so now I'm reading Bill O'Reilly's The Killing of Jesus.
Okay.
And what has occurred is I just finished Cleopatra, which is 40 years before Jesus. And the appointment of Pilate and those characters that came on during the time of Jesus, and how Rome still ruled the landscape that Jesus is growing up in. And so that made sense, and I didn't plan it that way.
Okay.
I wanted to read about Cleopatra, and my father-in-law got me to Jesus, and it just happened that way. So it wasn't a purposeful thing, but I thought, well, this is really interesting, and it sort of follows.
Okay.
So that sort of is interesting right now.
Okay.
I had the opportunity to teach at Cleveland State.
Okay.
And Ball and Wallace and Case, and talk about my career and politics in general and how government works and or doesn't work. And so I want to write a book, and the name of the book will be A Half a Step Ahead of the Devil.
Okay.
The subtitle, How Government Really Works.
Okay.
So that is on my to-do list.
When you get that done, will you let me know, and we'll come back and do a follow-up interview on the book and talk about the book. So I have done that. Excuse me. For both Jennifer Brunner and Charles Murray.
Oh, really?
Yes. Yeah. So.
Well, I'd like to do that someday, because I'm getting serious in talking about it. I presented a number of things at CSU.
Okay.
One was in 1998, I finally got my bachelor's degree. During all this time, I was doing this with just an associate degree.
Okay.
And so it was 25 years since I made that decision to move at 20th and Euclid with skill staff.
Okay.
And it's no longer there.
Yeah.
It's CSU property. I've got my degree. And in doing that, I got 24 credit hours by putting life experience.
Yeah.
Well, I took it very serious. And I had my career from the beginning of government till at that time was the safety director for Cleveland, and I did it at extraordinary detail.
Okay.
And produced 2 volumes of books about this thick.
Oh gosh.
Which is mostly research and documentation to everything I did, and I did it for my kids and my grandchildren. So I have that part done, but a lot's happened in my career since 1998.
You know, you mentioned your kids and your grandkids, and prior to this taping, we were over in your office, and you have a whole collection of various kids and grandkids and a variety of things, and you have many of your descendants are active in the armed forces.
Mm-hmm.
And I just want to say 2 things. One, I think that's very consistent with what I think is your own personal family culture as one of public service.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing that I'll state that I've noticed that I am increasingly alarmed at is, for better or for worse, you're part of the ruling elite. Okay? I mean, you know how things work. Okay? Yet, so often, the children of the ruling elite, do not go off into the armed forces. And that has me long-term concerned that we're getting to separation now. You know, you look at Congress, you look at the White House, you look at many levels of government, and there's this separation going on between and Charles Murray writes a lot about this. He doesn't talk about this aspect of it, but it goes to the inability of us to relate as a people. Mm-hmm. If you were raised in Euclid, my wife was raised in Lyndhurst, so I'm somewhat familiar with your neck of the woods too. It was relatively modest circumstances.
Yeah, I grew up in the projects there, and it wasn't. Anyhow, it was a unique growing up period.
Yeah.
And we're on the poor side of things.
Yeah, but it's left to you know how to talk to people. You know how to talk to the governors, and you know how to talk to the guy on the street.
Yeah, I think I do.
And that is being lost. And I'm not sure. That's part of what this whole thing is about, this whole video series is about, is to start to connect people in a different way, different format. Especially the younger generation, which, they tend to be more video focused and everything, podcasting, that type of stuff. And that's what a fair amount of this is for, is to try to go ahead and get this structure so that they understand this. Because like Mark Twain once wrote, he said, history seldom repeats, but it often rhymes.
Mm-hmm. And learning from it.
Yeah, and I'm going to, when your episode comes out, yes, the conversation about the marijuana is very helpful, because that's going to be an issue we're going to have to face. And the mental health issues have been very helpful, and we're going to have to face those. But I think that for the citizens out there need to know that we have people like you there who know truly you've been, you can't keep a job. I mean this nicely. But at the same time, we're going to need to come up with a way so that it works in the future. And you know how to talk to people. You can relate to everybody. I've seen you relate around to people here. You're uniformly kind and generous to everybody you encounter. I just do want to thank you for having this opportunity.
Oh, thank you, Gene. It's been a pleasure. I enjoyed this.
Okay. So this has been Gene Krebs on behalf of the Center for Community Solutions. We're high in Ohio. We'll be going around this great state, interviewing people. It's been my pleasure here today talking to Bill Denihan. And tune in next week. I have no idea who we're going to be talking to next week, but feel free to tune in. Thank you.
For more about the Center for Community Solutions or their publications, please visit www.communitysolutions.com.